Lupus cat. So, when you think about a nuclear war, an all-out nuclear war, not a terrorist attack, but an all-out nuclear war, Russia, China, America, India, Pakistan, Britain, France, they all launch at each other. There's two general reactions most people have, and I think these two general reactions are actually fairly commonplace within the prepper community as well as generally. The two reactions are panic-driven chaos. So when you know that the launchings are happening, you'll run around doing stuff in a state of frenzy. And fatalistic complacency. Certainly fatalistic complacency seems really reasonably common in prepper circles, that we just die. The problem is we won't. Most of us won't die in an all-out nuclear war. The dream of being vaporized and you don't have to worry about it, you know, kiss your bum goodbye, isn't true. The majority of people will not die from the flash, fireball, or even the blast of a nuclear weapon. And Joe sent me some figures, and I looked up some figures myself, and that pretty much is the truth. So the first part of this will just talk about what you should and shouldn't do. What you should do is you should have a plan, and you should have a written out plan. I'll include my plan again at the end of this video, so you're not acting in panic. So with certain things happening in the world stage, you do certain levels of alert and you get higher and higher with that. The other thing that you would want to do is you would want to use the 3 planks of surviving a nuclear bomb. The 3 planks that you need all 3. First plank is you need to have distance between you and any likely nuclear explosion. Kind of goes without saying. We'll get into how far. That's the interesting thing. So we need facts, right? So you can get facts after this general description. The other one is you want to have things between you and the nuclear explosion and the radiation to limit the amount of blast and flash and burns and radiation that hits you. So you want density. 3 foot of soil, well compacted, is a good density ratio. There's pictures at the end. We all know, be in a basement, don't be near an outside wall, seal up windows with concrete, breeze blocks, stuff like that. The third thing isn't really talked about. I've talked about it a lot, and people kind of like look at me like I'm crazy, I guess, but I want to be underground in my temporary shelter for 3 months following an all-out nuclear bomb attack. You know, if it's a terrorist attack on downtown Chicago, I'm probably not going to stay in the basement for 3 months. I probably won't even be in the basement, depending on windfall. But if there's been an all-out nuclear war, I think there's been an all-out nuclear war, I'm going to be in the basement for about 3 months. About 3 months is a good period of time to be underground. The radiation dissipates fairly quickly from the initial blast. Now, the government sources say 12 to 24 hours is better than none in the shelter, and 7 to 10 days to 2 weeks seems to be the official advice. But if you've prepped and you have plans, the limiting factor for this will be you, the amount of water you have stored, the amount of food you have stored, and if you're able to deal with wastes. So the main factor will be you. A lot of people are going to come up the next day and have a pop around just for a few minutes or a few seconds to see what's going on. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Stay underground for at least 2 weeks. Do not go up at all for 2 weeks is minimal advice in a nuclear war. The other one is what you do in the shelter. Now this is where, strangely enough, board games and reading books out loud come into play. So that's a good thing to have for that. Ah, dear. I find this topic very depressing. Okay. The other one that most preppers are planning to do is bug out. They have cars and they assume that they can get in their car and they can drive away, leaving aside the fact that EMP, electromagnetic pulse bombs, would almost certainly be detonated before missile strikes hit to disable the enemy as much as possible. We being the enemy, them being the enemy, them and us being me and you. So why are we doing this? I don't know. Hopefully we never will. So assuming your car can drive, assuming there's not rubble in the roads, assuming the bridges aren't broken, assuming a lot of other things, the worst barrier that we have to protect ourselves against radiation is cars. It's not as bad as being in the open, but it's bad. Now this goes back to the 1950s and 60s when they showed Americans, ordinary Americans with their little hats, driving along, seeing the flash, and then going into a culvert and driving the car over the culvert, driving the car over a culvert and then going underneath the car. Better for blast protection than most anything else you would have in an open field situation, but you've probably got a period of time that you can actually get to a building and break into the building. You should have tools to do that, so at the very least you can be in the middle of the building even if it doesn't have a basement, and then you can use the stuff in the building to create sides and a roof of a temporary structure. And you may stay there a week or two because you should have a car kit, right? All this is basic stuff. So now I'm going to talk about radiation and fallout, and I think this is the one area people get very scared about. The truth of it is, if you avoid the black rain, which is bits of hubaskat and concrete in buildings and soil that's sucked up, you should be okay. Most of the bursts that will happen will be air bursts, which will produce actually less radiation but a bigger initial damage than ground burst weapons. So I think I need to talk a bit about that for a couple of minutes, so bear with me.
Well, God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Abe said, man, you must be putting me on. God said no, Abe said what?
Welcome back. So yeah, the car, if you have nothing else, is a good idea, but you probably have other stuff. Okay, so we'll get into that. So what you've got after the blast, after the flash, after the blast, you've probably got between 15 and 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes or more, before the radiation will descend to the ground. There will be a radiation around from the blast, but there won't be greatly problematic to you at this point. So yes, you can build a trench and put the car over it, but most cars these days are made of very thin materials, in fact including plastics, and are made to be very lightweight. So back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, cars were pretty solid, steel structures, so there was some utility to using them. These days carry crowbars, break into buildings. That's my advice for that. The question, I think, is radiation. Radiation, when you have your temporary fallout shelter, if you're able to stay in it 3 months, stay in it 3 months. If you can only stay in it a week, stay in it a week. But get the mindset in your head that the outside is dangerous. So sleep in the shelter, cook and eat and go to the toilet in the shelter as far as you can for a period of months to years after the event. Limit the amount of exposure you'll get. You will have a lifetime exposure, and you'll probably die a lot younger than you might otherwise, and probably from a cancer. But you probably, if you do things right and are lucky, you probably have 15 to 20 to 30 years. The planet will not be sterilized. Creatures will recover to some degree. Life will be extremely hard. Anyway, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was the first time that nuclear weapons were used in anger in wartime. And what they did was they actually kind of basically destroyed all standing structures within half a mile of the actual ground zero, the point of explosion. Now, people survived almost at ground zero by being in a bank vault, and people died a lot further away than half a mile because glass and wood hit them. So remember the barrier, the distance and the barrier are the two things you need to do. You don't really have much control over the distance, but you may have control over the barrier. Now, they were about 20 kilotons, 10 to 20 kiloton range, and now we have weaponry in the megaton range. So a lot of people think that that means that the destruction will be 1,000 times worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Truth is, it will be about 10% worse or 100% worse. It doesn't go up on a gradient like that. The blast, the size of the ball, and the blast amount of radiation material blasted doesn't actually translate to an equal destruction from the point of ground zero. Air, other structures prevent that from happening. It doesn't explode in a vacuum. Joe pointed out a couple of sites which I'm going to link on this video, nuclearsecrecy.com and also Nukemap. They're sites to look at to see distance, where you're likely to be, where bombs are likely to fall, and the blast radius. Most bombs these days are 200 kilotons on ICBMs, missiles. They can go up to 1,000 kilotons, a megaton, and that's done mostly by Chinese. You should not look at the fireball. The fireball is something everybody always stares at in movies, right? Not a good idea. Do you know how far away you need to be from the fireball on a clear day to avoid having blindness occur, temporary blindness? With modern weapons, the distance would be probably 52 miles away. There will be a form of temporary blindness on a clear day if you look 50 miles away and stare at the fireball. So don't stare at the fireball. You'll know the fireball's there because you'll see it with your eyes clenched and doing everything on protection. The longer the fireball is illuminated, the higher the yield. So most modern weapons are going to have a fireball between 15 and 25 seconds. If you see the fireball of less than 2 seconds, it's probably a terrorist bomb. Okay? If you see one fireball in 25 seconds, it's probably a nuclear war. But don't overreact and kill everybody and go nuts. Because it could be one weapon, and it could be one missile, and it could be an accident. So bear that in mind, right? Again, it's going to be hard to find out information, but don't completely go nuts. This is not, I'm going to go nuts. You are a rational person, keep your brain functioning. So the other thing is you can estimate the yield by the length of time, the size of the fireball, and the length of time the fireball is in the sky. So around about, if it's half a minute or more, it's a 1 megaton. So with weaponry of that size, you really don't go anywhere near ground zero for decades afterwards. So that's something to bear in mind. If you are then going to bug out later on, you want to avoid where the bombs have been dropped, obviously. 13 up to 13 miles away from the modern weaponry, if you stare at the fireball, you'll be permanently blind forever. And like I say, the temporary blindness would be about 52, 53 miles away, and that's really painful when it comes back. It's not painful as it happens, but it's really painful afterwards. Burns, unprotected skin will burn at around about 7 miles away from the flash, in ways that are going to be extremely dangerous and painful to you. Up to 5 miles from the blast, you will have severe burns which will probably kill you a couple of days later, a week later. To give you an idea of modern weaponry, if you are 3.7 miles away from a 1 megaton blast and nothing is in the way of the blast, the air comes to you, the wind speed will be around about 158 miles per hour. Now the wind will actually work in a very strange way. It will be hitting you like a sustained blast, and then like a vacuum drop afterwards. So the houses will go vroom, vroom. So most structures that aren't very well made, up to about 10 miles away, are going to be destroyed or substantially damaged. I think that's the message of that. The zone of damage is likely to be up to 25 miles away. Now at this point you're saying, well, hooples, 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 everybody dies. Well, don't. They don't, and I'll explain why.
The sweet pretty things are in bed now, of course. The city fathers, they are trying to endorse the reincarnation of Paul Revere's horse. But the town has no need to be nervous.
Even in an all-out nuclear war, a lot of the weaponry won't actually be launched because it won't function. A lot of the weaponry will be fail en route, a lot of the weaponry will be taken out by countermeasures. If you think about it, Russia or China have a multiple number of targets in NATO to hit to ensure there's no retaliatory strike, let alone population centers, let alone factories and communications hubs. Just to take out where our nuclear weapons are in NATO, for sure, would be a major problem for both Russia and China. It would be a major problem for us as well. But the hardened sites are pretty well known and we could probably hit them. That's why Russia and China have invested heavily in mobile strategic nuclear weapons, and we in the West haven't so much. Now, when we talk about surviving a nuclear war, we have to talk about the initial explosions. We have to talk about the fireball, the burns, then the blast. Now, there's 5 types of nuclear explosion, and they're all reasonably serious, but some are more serious than others. For me, the worst case one would be sea burst, underwater explosion near to the coast. With the wind going from the sea to the land, that would produce a fantastic volume of highly radioactive seawater, which would basically make the area the rain comes down on incompatible with safe life for an awful long time. The EMP would be fired first all over the world to knock out any electronic systems at all. And in fact, they might well be your first and only warning of a nuclear war until such time as the actual bombs start going off. So if you suspect there's been an EMP, one of the things people do in prepping is they make Faraday cages and all the rest of the stuff. If you think there has been an EMP, assume there may be nuclear bombs dropping down within the next 15 to 30 minutes. It's always going to be better to shelter in place for half an hour to an hour after a possible EMP than it is to be caught outside when the bomb then blasts. So that's something you should be thinking about. Of course, you can have EMP without nuclear blast, but spend an hour being protected just in case it's war. Now, we also have to talk about nuclear winter, and nuclear winter is not the greatest thing. And you probably need food for 10 years or 2 years. I don't know how long. Nobody really actually knows how long. The truth of it is that there probably won't be any decent growing season for 3 to 5 years after a nuclear war. There will be growing seasons. You will be able to create greenhouses and grow some food during that period, but mostly it's going to be stored food. And that's also good because it won't be as contaminated. So now I'm saying to you guys, you need to have 5 to 10 years worth of food. Yeah, if you wish to survive reasonably well a nuclear bomb. Now, for most people, they will be 50 to 100 to 200 miles away from the nuclear bombs. They will hopefully be not contaminated severely by the plume of radiation. Hopefully they'll be able to shelter in basements and stuff like that. They will then eat the food that they grow. They will then eat the animals they hunt and fish, and that's okay because you need to, but you need to try and limit the radiation exposure. So plants that grow with rainwater are going to be more contaminated than plants that you can grow with well water and spring water. So bear that in mind. You may want to shield your plants from rain for quite some time after a nuclear bomb and irrigate them with well water system if you have that available. Okay, that's just something you might want to think about. Yeah, so there's a lot of information there. Basically, the longer the flash, the bigger the flash, the higher the plume, the higher the megaton, the kilotonnage is. Most weaponry is in the 400 to 550 kiloton range. Most damage will be total within 3 to 5 miles of the blast point. Most bombs will be airburst, which will mean lower amounts of radiation but a wider cone of blast on the ground. If you can be 25 miles away, that's in a shelter, that's great. If you can be 50 miles away in a shelter, that's great. And you can make your own shelters and use soil and compact the soil, because then you've got a safe growing medium afterwards. You want to be very cautious about limiting your exposure to rain, water and atmospheric dust for quite some time after this. You want to have a plan in place to keep warm in your shelter. You want to have a plan in place to feed yourself from stocked food, mostly, not entirely. It's not that possible for a period of at least a year to 2 years after a possible nuclear bomb. And you need to consider where you're going to go, what you're going to do, and how you're going to function. Society probably will not fall in a nuclear attack scenario. It's going to be really damaged for quite some time. And you really are going to have to work with your neighbours to get society re-going again. That's the key part. Now, my thing that I have, I'm currently in phase 1, which is I've spent an extra $500 of prepper money that I have designated for that target to buy extra long-term food. And I'll do that every time I hit phase 1. I will do that. Phase 8 is rebuilding society, and that's the phase that will be the hardest thing for us all to do. It's going to be relatively easy for most people to survive a nuclear bomb. Now, if you live in Montana, Colorado, Nebraska, North Dakota, or Wyoming, be aware of the fact that you are likely to see multiple ground-based nuclear weapons hit those 5 states. They have ICBMs. They probably will get pounded. So although those states are large and they have good places to be, look at where the nuclear weapons of the Air Force and the Air Force and the Army bases are. Look at where the missile command centers are. Look at those factors when you are living in those states and you're thinking about bugging out. Be very cautious of the fact that certain states are really going to get pounded by ground-based weapons. Ground-based weapons will irradiate and pollute the area a lot worse around the attack and in the downstream from it, from the air, much worse than an airburst weapon ever will do. So, yeah, so hopefully all of this is just garbage and none of us will ever have to need any of this knowledge. So, yeah. Thanks, Joe. Good stats, and I'll put them up at the end. He actually has the number of current Russian warheads and range that they yield that they have. So that's always an interesting thing to put into the Nukemap. All right, au revoir.